Are you leading others toward following God's voice, or are they leading you? Welcome to the Daily Devo. I am Vince Miller. This week we're in 1 Samuel chapter 15. I've titled this chapter, The Consequences of Disobedience, and we're going to see those consequences today. But in yesterday's devotional, we discussed how Saul's insecurity led him to disobedience, masking his fears with all these empty sacrifices. We explored the importance of confessing our insecurities to God before they drive us further into sin. Today, we read the consequences of his disobedience. Let's begin in verse 24. Saul said to Samuel, so it's a king speaking to the prophet, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So right here, King Saul finally breaks down. His rationalizing, deflecting, blaming, and explaining that we talked about yesterday all come to an end because he finally feels the consequences of his actual sin. But you need to see the bottom line core issue. His insecurities have led him because he's listening to the wrong voice. Instead of listening to God's voice, he's listening to the people's voice. Instead of trying to please God, he's trying to please all the people. And this verse here outright rejects democracy in the transition from the judges to the kings. You see, the people here are not getting a voice. The only voice that they should be hearing is God's voice. And we learned that democracy was not God's plan. And we all know why. It's because people are sinful, and sometimes so is their voice. Because guess what? In a democracy, people advocate and vote for their selfish desires. That's what everyone does. And for those of us who live in the U.S. today, we live in this socio-political experiment. And I promise you, it's not going to end well because people are sinful. In Saul's situation, he was appointed to be the megaphone for God's voice and to the people, not vice versa. Now, I just want to say this. I can't predict the future of our nation or any nation, but I know this. Believers can always be a voice for God into the sinful world. We can proclaim God's voice into a world that proclaims their own voice. Because you see, this world has no problem with proclaiming its ideologies. They're willing to sacrifice the unborn and their vas deferens, it appears, to their ideologies wide open on the streets. But as believers, we have a divine call to be the voice of God in a world that chooses to ignore his voice and listen to its own. So while you have breath, that's what you should be doing, proclaiming the voice of God to your family, in your workplace, to your church, and in the world. Now, here's what Saul says next in verses 25 through 31. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may bow before the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. As Samuel turned to go away, Saul seized the skirt of his robe and it tore. And Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And of course, that's David. And also the glory of Israel will not lie or have regret, for he is not a man that he should have regret. Then he said, I have sinned. Yet honor me now before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me that I may bow before the Lord your God. See, he's trying to save face here. So Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul bowed before the Lord. Now, right here, Saul appears to be penitent or repentant. But guess what? Sin has consequences. Now, this is true in every form of leadership. Sin has dire consequences that affect our ability to lead others and continue in our role. Saul shouldn't be surprised by this. Listening to God actually was the condition of the continuity of his role as leader of the people. Let's just turn back real quick to 1 Samuel chapter 12. I'm going to read verses 14 through 15. Here's the condition of Saul's role. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But But here's the condition. If you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandment of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. This draws out one of the great tensions and principles of leadership. Leadership with God is contingent on our followership of God. Leadership with God is contingent on our followership of God. You see, when it comes to our relationship with God, God is the only leader. The rest of us, all of us, are followers. However, some of us are allowed, or in this case, Saul was appointed, to the leadership of God's followers. Therefore, if we or him steward our leadership well, we may be allowed to steward a greater following. But if we fail, we're removed and rejected from our leadership. Now, we can repent and bow before God, but this does not always result in us continuing with the role of leadership because we were unable to steward the condition of the role. This is exactly why I'm okay with God removing me or any other fallen spiritual leader from their role if they are unable to lead God's people. And as we know, God's going to anoint a new leader, who is David, who enters the story in the very next chapter. I'm excited about that one, so stay around for chapter 16. But still, there's a little bit of unfinished business here, so let's read a couple of more verses, my favorite of the chapter. You'll see why. Then Samuel said, "Bring here to me Agag, the king of the Amalekites." And Agag came to him cheerfully. Agag said, "Surely the bitterness of death is past," thinking his life's going to be fine. And Samuel said, "As your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women." And Samuel hacked Agag to pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. I'm sorry, I have to laugh at that one. Samuel here had to do what the king was supposed to do but didn't do. Samuel had to do what the king was supposed to do but didn't do. And I love this ending, not because of the brutality of it, nor because I'm a man of the cloth like Samuel, but because it makes a very profound point. You see, it takes a man of God who hears the voice of God to do the work of God. It takes a man of God who hears the voice of God to do the work of God. Now, if you go back to chapter 12 again, you will see and remember that the people felt Samuel was getting a little too old and they needed a successor. But instead of finding another man of the cloth to act as judge and prophet, the people demanded a king. And God gave them what they wanted. But as we see here, their king is not up for the task. So a very old man, chosen by God, has to do the work that the king won't do. Here's the bottom line of this text today. God chooses leaders who listen to him. God chooses leaders who listen to him. And these are the leaders he appoints to lead his followers and nothing less. So do this today. Listen to God and do nothing less. Otherwise, you too will be removed from your leadership. I love you guys. I pray this blesses you. If it has, share it with someone else. And I'll see you right back here again tomorrow.